I want to offer our listeners maybe a little bit of a different window into this whole discussion around fatherhood. And I want to ask uh, really about what does it mean to be a father today? And in terms of what's the core metaphor? See, every idea that we have has a core metaphor that gives it a focus. So for example, what does it mean to be Canadian? We may say, well, to be polite. So the core metaphor would be polite. The idea is to be Canadian. And if we look at fatherhood, if we go back to pre-1830s, fatherhood, the core metaphor was a stern patriarch. From the 1830s to 1900, it was the distant breadwinner. It was the provider. From 1900s into the 1970s, fatherhood was primarily about the disciplinarian, like wait till your father gets home. How many heard that, right? Or the weekend dad, where you play baseball. Like fatherhood got reduced to throwing a ball back and forth with our kids. And what shifted in the 1970s and further was that we had a shift, a dramatic shift socially. There began to become changes in family law and family structure. We got the divorce law came into effect in the late 60s. We had a rise in single parenthood. We had a rise in blended families. The 1970s introduced this openness to non-traditional parenting roles. And with it, a whole new vocabulary for being father. The idea of father got, we imported core metaphors like stepdad, adoptive dad, stay-at-home dad, part-time dad, absent father, deadbeat dad. We got all these metaphors that started to describe fathers. I want to reach back and actually see if we can learn from our past. I want to go back to ancient archetypes, ancient metaphors that we can import into the idea of fatherhood. Now, I'm going to use some terms that today these terms may feel different to use them, like how language kind of goes. We use words today that we didn't before. Words that we used to use have different meanings now. I want to pull on 5 metaphors, 5 archetypes of fatherhood, but use them in the ancient sense to see if they can inform us some way about being fathers today. Now, I think there is no single metaphor that we can pull on. I think this is more a blending of metaphors, if you will, allowing a dialogue between metaphors of what fatherhood can be. And I want to describe these in terms of our relationships with our children. So what does it look like to actually engage with our kids? Now, to be more helpful, rather than just present an idea, I actually want to contrast. I want to contrast what I would consider being a healthy expression of these 5 archetypes, contrast it with deficient expressions of the archetype. So if you have a piece of paper and you're writing notes, if you were to create 3 columns, and the first column would be healthy expression, second column would be deficient aggressive, and the third column be deficient passive. So healthy, deficient aggressive, deficient passive. I want to take a look now at 5 archetypes. The first, the king, father as king. When we talk about father as king, what we're talking about here is use of power. Someone who empowers others, someone who blesses, someone who lives generously, someone who's about truth and justice, someone who deals with his children in a fair way, someone who brings clear structure, clear discipline, is consistent in their response and always has their best interest, the children's best interest in mind. Let's contrast that healthy king from a deficient king, the aggressive. We'll call him the tyrant king. This is a father who's unable to empower. He's hesitant to do it, lives by a double standard. He has a standard, his children has a standard. There's controls through fear, sometimes exploits or even humiliates a child to get them to do what he wants, overly punitive and restrictive. That's the old my way or the highway. That would be an expression of power, but it would be more leaning toward the aggressive. Let's contrast that with the passive. We'll call him the little prince. And the little prince is someone who's insecure, easily intimidated, double-minded, easily swayed by their children's response, gets railroaded, even controlled by his children, avoids responsibility, and makes decisions more impulsively rather than thinking through what would be the best decision, what would be the best way to help my child. So we could say of the 5 archetypes, this first one, the king, is one that really has to do with the strength that we have. A second metaphor, the priest. Now, the priest, a healthy priest metaphor, we could define this way: a father who preserves the dignity of his children, someone who speaks truthfully but speaks in love, someone who speaks and acts without pretense. There isn't deception. Someone who knows how to express mercy and grace. You actually can't express mercy and grace if you don't have consistency. Consistency is the premise to be able to be graceful. Otherwise, mercy could just look chaotic. So there has to be clear sort of structure and understanding of the order and rules and so forth. And when our children then fail, we can choose to hold to the consequences we've deemed, or we can choose to be merciful and graceful. You can only be merciful if there's consistency. This is why the king, healthy king part needs to be blended with the priest. A healthy priestly father is someone who demonstrates humility, someone who nurtures the conscience in their child, respects their conscience, teaches them to pay attention to their conscience. A healthy priestly father is someone who helps their child learn how to process pain. And they demonstrate the humility of apologizing and expressing forgiveness and how to live out reconciliation. Now let's look at the deficient priest. On the aggressive side, we call him the critic. This is one who discloses a child's indiscretions to others, sort of makes things public and shames them. Someone who makes fun of his children rather than covers his children. The critic may use threats to keep certain things secret. They may even use spirituality, the guilt, to manipulate. Nothing's ever good enough for the critic. And they use the child's past against them. This is just like in the past. They keep dragging up the past. That's the deficient priest and the aggressive in terms of being critic. Let's contrast that with the priest who's passive, deficient of passive. He would be the detached bystander. This is the see no evil, hear no evil. They minimize and ignore conflicts. They get intimidated about getting involved in family conflicts. They just don't want to be involved. Take that to your mother. They get detached from the pain of their children. They're just not able to be present with them. And they're passive spiritually. They're unfocused in terms of their spirituality. So here we have the priest who can be healthy. The unhealthy aggressive is the critic. The unhealthy passive is the detached bystander. Now our third metaphor, the warrior. Father as warrior. Now the healthy expression of the warrior, he demonstrates courage. He defends and protects his family and his children. He lives purposefully. He acts decisively. He's adventurous. He explores the world. He explains how the real world works. And he completes undesirable tasks. Even though he doesn't like doing a certain thing, the warrior does what he's called upon to do. Now, the unhealthy, the deficient warrior on the aggressive side, we could identify him as the sadist. This is someone who's driven by his own self-interest, his own agenda for his children's lives. They're going to do whatever the imagination is in his mind he has for them. He belittles his children, believing that that will make them stronger. One of the greatest mistakes we can make, believing we're making them stronger. They lack empathy for their children. They have a difficulty imagining themselves in the place of their child. They're unaware of the negative impact that they're having on their child's self-worth. We could contrast that with the passive warrior. This would be the masochist. This is the father who allows his children to manipulate him, abuse him, yell at him, scream at him, name call him, condemn him. He's unable to say no to his children. And it could be because of guilt or whatever it is, or he doesn't feel he's got the self-confidence to stand up. He lets self-sacrifice occur to the extent where he fails to take care of himself. And even self-abusive by punishing himself to the point of past exhaustion out of guilt all the way to physical illness. So this would be examples of the deficient warrior. Then the fourth, the sage. So we've had father as king, father as priest, father as warrior, now father as sage. The sage father is someone who's a student of life and a student of his children. One of the greatest gifts you can give your children, study your children, know their personality, know their likes, know their dislikes, know what they value, know what's important to them, study them, be a student of them. The more you know about them, it will equip you as a father as to how to parent them in a very focused and customized way. The sage father calibrates his life to his values. There isn't a disconnect between the things we value and how I live. Those things calibrate and line up. The sage father learns, he teaches his children how to discern, how to make good choices, how to learn from our mistakes. I think it was maybe Fred or somebody talked about, maybe it's Dr. Wayne, the interesting mistakes, learning from your mistakes. What did you learn through this? The sage modality calls for that kind of a discussion rather than just quickly condemning. The sage father has a developmental perspective. He sees his children developmentally, growing through different stages. And as our kids grow and develop, we have to develop with them. We can't stay in a parenting style that matches a 4-year-old when they're 8. We need to parent them as an 8-year-old. And when they're 12, we can't parent them as an 8-year-old. Now they're 12. We have to keep growing with them. We have to develop with our children. And the sage element of this is calling us to be a student of our children, to know what developmental their stage at, and then make the necessary adjustments to match them, to walk with them. So I've been married just over 30 years to an incredible woman. I have kids that are in their 20s now, young adults, and it's different parenting them now. One of the questions I've asked them along the way, how am I doing as your dad? When they were 10, 14, 18, I remember saying to each of my kids, my oldest is a daughter. When my daughter was, well, as a child, all the way growing up, let's just say at 18, I've never parented an 18-year-old before, honey. So how am I doing as a dad? What do you need from me now? And then she's at 22. I've never parented a 22-year-old daughter before. So I'm learning. What do you need from me now? She had learned enough that she was able to actually instruct me. I don't need that anymore, Dad. I really need this now. That's parenting developmentally and tracking with our kids. And the sage is able to bring the gift of meaningful dialogue, reflecting on life. Now let's talk about the two deficiencies of the sage. On the aggressive sage, that would be the manipulator. This is the one who says one thing and does another, the one who plays mind games, one who uses propaganda to create fear and self-doubt, to keep control over your children, keep them dependent on you. Someone who deconstructs and mocks his children's pursuit of their meaning and their success if it's outside of what you think that they should be doing. That's the manipulator sage. Then on the passive side, we have Mr. Innocent. Plays dumb, lacks confidence. I don't have time. Go ask your mother. I don't know. Figure it out yourself. That's the Mr. Innocent. And he allows his children to blindly live life without reflection. Fifth, and I love this one because it's the lover. We've got the king, the priest, the warrior, the sage, and now lover. A healthy lover father. He's actively present. And I think it was just, who was it? Andrew? This is Andrew's message. He just talked about it. Actively present, passionate about your children's life. You laugh, you play, you get childlike with them. You're emotionally available, emotionally vulnerable, affectionate without reserve. One of the things we've practiced in our home, beginning of the day, end of the day. My kids are in their 20s. This has not stopped from the day they were brought home. First thing of the day, we hug them, hold them, and bless them. End of the day, hug them, hold them, bless them. My son now, who's 6'6", he'll wake me up if I've gone to bed early. He'll tap me on the side, which kind of freaks me out, but he'll say, Dad, come on, we haven't hugged yet. He's still in his 20s. Why? We want them to know they are loved every single day, beginning and the end. Put rituals into your lifestyle. Don't wait for moments. Create it in the lifestyle of how you parent, loving your children and knowing that they are loved. The healthy lover father is empathetic. He creates and he celebrates the children. He champions them, makes a big deal about their successes, teaches them healthy self-care, and teaches them inclusive love, not only within them and the family, but generally to be inclusive, how they relate to the outside world. Now let's talk about the deficient lover father. On the aggressive side, that's the hedonist. So he assesses life in terms of his own emotional welfare. If this works for me, then it'll work for everybody else. Requires the children to take care of his emotional needs. If he's upset, it's like, children, be quiet. They have to respond and settle him. He loves only in return. If the children make a gesture, he'll make a gesture. Easily distracted from nurturing his children through his own self-interest or pleasures, and uses his children for his own enjoyment. Let's talk about the passive lover. This is the impotent lover. Someone who lacks enthusiasm or passion for his children. They're just sort of flat. Someone who relates to his children only out of duty, not apart from duty. Sorry about that. Difficulty being vulnerable or affectionate. Is emotionally alienated from his children. Uninterested in participating in their lives. So you can imagine that if that's how the fathering response comes across, what might be the impact on a child. But I want to suggest to you of these 5 archetypes. King has to do with identity and responsibility. The priest has to do with integrity and wholeness. The warrior has to do with courage and purpose. The sage has to do with focus and discipline and discernment. And the lover has to do with care and intimacy. One of my mentors said this: all men are destined to be fathers, not get a woman pregnant. All men have a need to be a source of life to others and to give without return. Otherwise, they live an unfulfilled existence. Being a father brings out the very best in men. And I'm going to pause there. I realize that probably might have fallen into the fire hose category. But I hope what that does is give you a paradigm to maybe evaluate how you're doing as a dad. Maybe identify some places where there's a bit of conviction. Wow, I need to step in a way I haven't before. But I hope that inspires you.